It was early morning, the kind of silence that feels heavier than words. The sky was still waking up, and the world didn't yet know that history had already changed forever. Outside a sealed tomb, Roman guards stood watch, unaware that they were standing on the edge of a miracle. Then suddenly, the ground began to shake, not like an ordinary tremor, but something deeper, something powerful. The earth itself responded, as if creation was reacting to something divine. The stone that sealed the tomb began to move, and in that moment, light burst out from within, blinding, pure, unstoppable. The guards fell to the ground in fear, powerless before what they were witnessing. By the time the shaking stopped, everything had changed. The tomb was open. At that same moment, a group of women were walking quietly through the morning air. Among them was Mary Magdalene. Their hearts were heavy, filled with grief and confusion. They came to honor the one they loved, but what they found was not what they expected. The stone was gone, the tomb was open, and inside there was no body, only silence, and a mystery that defied everything they believed. Mary stood there, frozen between fear and disbelief. Tears filled her eyes as she stepped back into the garden. She thought everything was lost. She thought someone had taken him, and in her grief she began to cry. But then something changed. A voice, gentle, familiar, yet impossible. Mary. In that single word, everything shifted. The sorrow, the confusion, the pain, all of it disappeared in an instant. She looked up, and suddenly she saw him, alive, not as a memory, not as a dream, but real, standing before her. The one she thought she had lost was alive again. Her tears turned into something else, not grief anymore, but overwhelming joy. It was the first moment of a truth that would change the world forever. Death had been defeated, and this was only the beginning. Far away, in a quiet room, the disciples sat together in fear, doors locked, voices low. Their world had fallen apart, and they didn't know what came next. Then suddenly, without warning, he was there, standing among them. No door opened, no sound was made, just presence. Peace be with you. The fear that filled the room slowly began to fade. They couldn't believe their eyes. Some were still afraid. Some were confused. But as he showed them his hands, as they saw the wounds, something inside them changed. Fear turned into wonder. Wonder turned into belief. And belief turned into joy. But not everyone was there. Thomas, when they told him what had happened, he refused to believe it. It sounded impossible, unreal. I need to see it myself, he said. I need to touch the wounds. Days passed, and then it happened again. The same room, the same silence, and once again he appeared. This time, Thomas was there. No arguments, no explanations, just an invitation. Touch. In that moment, doubt collapsed, not because of words, but because of truth. Thomas fell to his knees. My Lord and my God. Faith, born not from stories, but from encounter, and the message was clear. Blessed are those who believe, even without seeing. Days later, by the Sea of Galilee, the disciples returned to something familiar. Fishing. The night was long. The nets came up empty, again and again. Nothing. But as dawn broke, a figure stood on the shore. They didn't recognize him. Not yet. Cast your net on the other side. It seemed simple, almost random, but they obeyed. And suddenly, everything changed. The nets filled, overflowing, more than they could handle. And in that moment, recognition came. It's him. Without hesitation, Peter jumped into the water. No second thought, no hesitation, just movement, just desire to reach him. When they arrived on shore, they found something unexpected. Not a speech, not a miracle, but a meal, bread, fish,
a quiet moment. After everything that had happened, he sat with them, in silence, in peace. And then he turned to Peter. Do you love me? The question was simple, but it carried weight. Peter answered, Yes. Again, the question came, Do you love me? And again, he answered. But the third time, something broke inside him, because he remembered the denial, the failure, the moment he said he didn't know him. And now he was being asked again, not to condemn him, but to restore him. Feed my sheep. It wasn't just forgiveness. It was purpose. It was calling. And in that moment, Peter was no longer defined by his failure. He was defined by what came next. Time passed, and the final moment came. On a mountain, under an open sky, they gathered once more. This time, not in fear, but in expectation. He stood before them, not just as someone who had returned, but as someone who had overcome everything. All authority is given. The words were
not loud, but they carried a weight that reached far beyond that mountain, a kind of authority that didn't need to prove itself, because it simply was. All authority, in heaven and on earth, has been given to me. The disciples stood still, not just listening, but absorbing, because they knew this moment was different. This was not just another teaching. This was direction. Go. One word, but it changed everything. Not stay, not wait, not hide. Go. Into every nation, every land, every corner of the world. Teach, guide, carry the truth forward. What they had witnessed was not meant to stay with them. It was meant to spread, like light breaking through darkness, like hope rising where fear once lived. They were no longer just followers. They had become messengers, carriers of something far greater than themselves. And even though the task seemed impossible, they were not alone. Teach them to follow everything I have shown you. These were not just instructions. They were a continuation, a bridge between what had happened and what was about to begin. And then came the promise, quiet, simple, but eternal. I am with you, always. Not sometimes, not only in strength, but always, in doubt, in fear, in moments of weakness, in moments of courage, always. And as those words settled into their hearts, something began to happen, something they would never forget. He began to rise, slowly, gently, not with force, but with peace, as if the earth itself was releasing him. Light surrounded him, soft at first, then brighter. The wind shifted, the sky seemed to open, and step by step, moment by moment, he was lifted higher. The disciples stood there, watching, not moving, not speaking, just watching. Because how do you react to something like this? How do you process a moment that feels bigger than time itself? He rose above them, above the mountain, above the world they knew, and then the clouds received him, not hiding him, but welcoming him. And just like that, he was gone from their sight, but not from their lives. Silence filled the air, a deep, powerful silence, not empty, but full, full of meaning, full of realization. They looked at the sky, as if expecting something more, and then they were no longer alone. Two figures stood beside them, bright, calm, unshaken. Why do you stand looking into the sky? The question wasn't a rebuke. It was a reminder, a shift in focus. The moment had passed, but the mission had just begun. He will return, just as you have seen him go. Hope, not as a feeling, but as a certainty. And with that, everything became clear. This was not an ending. It never was. This was a beginning, a movement, a story that would continue through them, through their actions, through their courage, through their faith. Slowly, they turned, not back in fear, but forward with purpose. Step by step, they began to walk, not as the same people, but as something new.
The world they were walking into was still broken, still uncertain, still filled with challenges, but they carried something within them now, something unshakable. They had seen death, and they had seen it defeated. They had faced doubt, and they had found truth. They had lost hope, and they had seen it restored. And now they carried that hope into the world, because the story of the resurrected Jesus was never meant to end at the tomb, or the garden, or even the mountain. It was meant to live on, in every place, in every generation, in every heart that chooses to believe. And even now, that same question remains, not just for them, but for all of us. What will you do with what you've seen? Because the story continues, and the invitation is still open.
And maybe that's where this story truly becomes personal, because this was never just about a moment in history. It was never only about a tomb, or a mountain, or even the people who were there. It's about what it means now, because the same message, the same truth, still echoes today, not as noise, but as a quiet invitation to believe, even when it's hard, to move forward, even when the path is unclear, to carry light in a world that still knows darkness. The disciples walked away from that mountain, not because they had all the answers, but because they had seen enough to trust, enough to go, enough to begin. And maybe that's the real question, not what happened then, but what happens next, because the story didn't end with them, and it doesn't end here. It continues in every choice, in every step of faith, in every moment where doubt meets courage and chooses to believe anyway. So the question remains, not just for them, but for you. What will you do with this story? Because the invitation is still open, and the answer is yours.